Hi, it's Jamie Mock, CFO of Moderna, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leadership Podcast.
This is episode 1100.
And then I think the other thing which gets people that's part of any type of quote unquote transaction, and that could be being a public company or being a private acquisition, whatever that might look like, is you got to have a really, really crisp product strategy. And you got to have a way to tie that product strategy back to long-term performance of the business. And you know, I think that we're really bringing that. We have a really strong chief product and technology officer. Claire is her name. She was one of the reasons I joined here. And she's a great partner in thinking through that. We talk in terms of outcomes. And you think about 3 big outcomes for Fullstory. And again, I don't view eventual liquidity event as an outcome. Outcomes meaning we're going to grow and accelerate our enterprise business. You know, that's a business for us that's now 65% of our ARR versus, 3 years ago, it was like 40%. So growing up market, and you and I know bigger customers mean bigger contracts, stickier revenue.
Hi, everyone. Today on CFO Thought Leader, we welcome back Chad Gold, entering his 4th CFO career chapter at Fullstory, the Atlanta-based analytics company. You'll hear Gold advance his data depth wins mantra, a philosophy that outlaws friction, whether it be inside customer journeys or your back office workflows. Plus, Gold looks back at his tenure as CFO of Salesloft and shares a page from his capital playbook. During Salesloft's 2021 billion-dollar peak, he sensed a market turn and ran a dual track that allowed Salesloft to opt in to a Vista Equity deal that would deliver liquidity without surrendering its independence. You'll hear about that and much more on today's episode. Our talk with CFO Chad Gold begins after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus dollars back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
And hello, veteran SaaS finance leader Chad Gold is back with us. Chad recently opened his 4th CFO chapter as finance chief of Fullstory, an AI-powered behavioral data platform. We'll find out more about that. His early career journey spans an 8-year FP&A tour of duty at Home Depot, as well as a divisional CFO stint at SAP Ariba, before the door to the CFO office swung open for him the first time. Chad, welcome back to CFO Thought Leader.
Jack, it's great to be with you again. And, I'm a big fan of CFO Thought Leader, so always an honor to join you.
Nice to hear that. Thank you. Hey, I was looking over some of the press you received upon stepping back into to another CFO role, and I saw this quote from the Fullstory's CEO. Said your deep Atlanta tech ties were a factor in your hire. I love that because too often we think of Silicon Valley with tech, and I think of you as a tech, having had conversations with you before from your SAP experience on forward as a tech CFO. But Atlanta tech ties. Talk a little bit about Atlanta for us and that sort of an ecosystem down there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spent now the entire 22 years of my career in the Atlanta area. You mentioned I started at EY in corporate finance, but then 8 years at the Home Depot, which is headquartered here. And my first move into software was at Ariba. You mentioned that. And we had a big presence in Atlanta. And so our finance function was primarily headquartered down here. When I left SAP for my first CFO job, it was at an Atlanta-based company called Rubicon Technologies, and then which ultimately led me to Salesloft, where I was for 5.5 years when you and I met last. And I think, when I think about the Atlanta technology community, there is this network of companies like Fullstory, where I'm very grateful to be now. Companies like Salesloft, like Calendly, Florence Healthcare, OneTrust. But there are incredible companies being built here, but it's still like an earlier stage kind of tech when you compare that to the maybe the New Yorks or the San Francisco Silicon Valleys of the world. And so I have this tremendous desire to help grow and make Atlanta technology companies successful. I was very fortunate to be able to do that with Salesloft, joining when it was only 20 million, growing it 10 times over. We ultimately sold it to Vista Equity Partners, and it's still been very successful under Vista. And so there was a draw to coming back. I think one of the things for me, when I left Salesloft after working with Vista for 2 years post-transaction, I stepped in as G2's first CFO, the world's largest software marketplace. And it was a great job. And I love being the first CFO. It gave me a chance to build and shape and really help take the finance and operations to the next level. But G2 is headquartered in Chicago. And I was traveling a lot. And I needed to. You have to be on the ground. I wanted to be with our leadership team, with our CEO, and with my finance team. We also had a big presence internationally, so I wanted to travel there. But after doing that for a year and a half, one thing was a very unique opportunity in joining Fullstory came up. And I started to make the decision, my oldest daughter's going into high school. I only have so many years that I can do this for incredible technology communities in Atlanta while my kids are home. And so all of those reasons, including, family, was a big draw to come back to Fullstory. And, Scott, our CEO, I'm very lucky, but, he knows my family. He's been to my house for dinner before. And that's important to me, I think. And you can only get that if you're able to do it in your hometown.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Too often we don't examine how decisions are made sometimes. Are there tech, I imagine there are, there's always sort of tech networking events and what have you. I mean, have you been able to leverage the tech community down there in some way as well? Or do you feel like you're part of it, like a member?
I do, yeah. I would say certainly when I was part of Salesloft, I did. It all revolves around, there's the Atlanta Technology Village, which was founded by David Cummings. Many people know him. He was the founder of Pardot, ultimately sold it to ExactTarget, which then sold to Salesforce. And he has reinvested heavily in the Atlanta technology community. So he was on the board of Salesloft and was our seed investor. We also had a gentleman named Tom Noonan, who's a big technology investor in Atlanta, was the CEO of a huge tech company that was successful here. And I think, all those technology investors have all given back. And so there's this network of executives, including the Salesloft team, and now other CFOs that I get to spend time with. I got to do it when I was part of G2. I still lived here, so I think it was great. But what I found when I rejoined Fullstory, and I've only been here, just a month and a half, all of my service providers, as an example, my auditors, my bankers, everybody's in Atlanta. And so it was the same group that I was working with at Salesloft, and it was like I immediately came back and everybody came back. It was like putting a family back together, I guess, in a way. And, I pride myself on, I had breakfast with a fellow CFO yesterday morning who's a little bit earlier in their career, and I'll meet with anybody if they want to talk, and I don't know all the answers, so I'm asking questions too. You remember on our, probably don't remember this, on our episode almost 4 years ago, I talked to you about having a text chain with other CFOs, most of whom are in the Atlanta area, all from Ariba. There's now 7 of us from Ariba that are software CFOs, and we all live here. And so whenever you get like an idea, like I sent one yesterday, had a thought about a comp plan, and I sent it to the group, and I got feedback from them. And it's just a great thing to have, I think, and really lucky that there have been so many entrepreneurs, including Kyle Porter, who I work with at Salesloft, who have given a lot back to Atlanta, which has helped us to thrive as a tech community.
Just interested to learn. Now, you mentioned the the sale of Salesloft to Vista. We hope you'll share some more details with us a little later on that. But I'm wondering, as you step into a new company, and again at G2, it sounds like that was you were the first CFO. So that's a different weight class of company. You stepped into Salesloft. I'm not sure what size it was when you stepped in. And here you are stepping into Fullstory. Can you just give us a sense of were they similar? Are they similar weight classes of companies?
Yeah, they do differ. And I put them on a continuum. Salesloft was the smallest, and I was the first CFO there. G2 actually was larger by a few notches than Salesloft was, but I was still the first CFO. Fullstory's had a CFO before. And so Fullstory, while it's not the biggest company I've ever worked for, including Salesloft was bigger when I left, and Home Depot and SAP Ariba. Fullstory is the first time that I've stepped in, not as the first CFO, but the second. And, I was thinking about that. I'm actually really lucky because there are a number of things that you have to do when you step in as the first CFO. Potentially building out brand new functions, putting in, brand new systems, which I'm doing some of that here. But because the team has done a lot of great work before I got here, that's actually freed me up to pretty quickly get into more strategic topics like product strategy and go to market, and even some inorganic things like thinking about, if we wanted to grow via some acquisitions, what would that look like? And normally as a first CFO, you can't even get into those things until sometimes 90 days, 6 months into the job, because you got to fix some of the infrastructure. And I feel very fortunate that Fullstory had done a good job of investing in the infrastructure. I inherited a very strong team. I've been able to bring in some folks that work with me at Salesloft too, which has been cool to put those two teams together. And, that's allowed me to move really fast. I'd say faster than I ever have as a new CFO to a company. But you're spot on, Jack. There's definitely differences between the three for sure.
Yeah. So tell us about Fullstory. What is this company about? What is the opportunity that?
Yeah. I mean, so at its core, Fullstory, you mentioned this in the kickoff, is a behavioral data platform. And think of it like a way that you can capture the entire digital experience of your customers via, any type of web-based experience. That can be a website, like e-commerce. That can be a product, like a software product. And because we capture all the data, we can give you insights into, where are they getting stuck? What are some of your most, challenging flow paths for your customers? And because now you've got AI, when you have all that data, you can then use that data to then give opportunities and insights to customers. Say, hey, like this customer is going to leave you because they're following the same path as everybody else. You need to put a coupon, or you need to do something different for that customer immediately if you want to keep them. So it drives more revenue, it reduces churn. And, one of the big things that brought me to Fullstory was, the word AI gets thrown out, not the word, or the initials AI gets thrown out a lot right now. But if you take a step back, the companies that have the capabilities to capture the most comprehensive sets of data in a meaningful way are going to win. And that is the core of the technology that Fullstory's built. And so that was something I saw as a huge opportunity in what I would argue is, probably one of the most disruptive technologies to come out since you and I have, been in tech for sure. And then the other thing I'd say, which I saw in Fullstory, what I get really excited about, I mentioned to you that you can use Fullstory to understand the digital experience of your customers. We just launched a product called Workforce, where you can use the exact same technology to understand the digital experience of your employees. And when you think about that, think about your basic accounts receivable person. They might have to go through 3 or 4 different systems to get a task done. Wouldn't you like to know the path they're having to take, where they're hitting friction, where you can make them more efficient? What are opportunities in your processes to automate, not so you can replace people, but so you can make them more productive so they can do even more value-added things. And I think that that gets to be really cool when you think the same technology you can use for your customers, you can use for your employees too.
Could you tell us something about the company's capital structure, an abbreviated history, or? What could you tell us?
So Fullstory is venture backed, has raised 4 named rounds of funding, so all the way through Series D. And again, I think another reason I came here, an incredible roster of investors. So Kleiner Perkins was an early investor here, Stripes, early investor, Primera, who I've worked with before, Growth Equity is an investor here, Salesforce Ventures, Google Ventures, Dell Technologies, all very active and interested in the success of Fullstory. And so it's rare that you can put together a roster of those type of growth investors that are that engaged in helping you to be successful. And then the other thing I would say is, in addition to having that type of roster of investors, I give Scott Boyd, our CEO, a lot of credit. He's also recruited 2 really strong independent board members. So there's a gentleman named Ryan Barreto, who is the CEO of Sprout Social, who's on our board. So awesome to have an operator like that. And then actually a treat for me that I've never had before, a gentleman named Alex Estevez, who is also in the Southeast, lives in Greenville, but was the former CFO of Atlassian. And he's on our board. And so I have this awesome opportunity to engage with great investors and just really, really tenured and seasoned board members. And I think, I'm a lifelong learner. I've got, yes, I've mentioned 22 years, but I've got many more years to learn. And so to be surrounded by people like that, I get really excited. And I think, you look at, you think of this concept you've heard me say before, Jack, lines, not dots. You pick your investors, not just for the money, but for the partnership and the support. And I think Fullstory's done an awesome job of recruiting great investors here.
I think we're still in your first 90 days, or you can reflect on your first 90 days for us. Curious where you spent your time with. Who did you spend your time with? Were they financial or?
Yeah. Finance is just the expression of everything that happens in the business and numbers. And so I actually think that the most successful finance leaders actually spend time with the business first. And so I spent a lot of time almost doing a roadshow, is probably not the word, but just chats with, all of our revenue leaders, customer success, product, pricing and packaging, to really just get an understanding and listen and learn. I'm a big fan of, you got to listen for the first 30 days, because if you start making recommendations, you're not informed, and that's not the right approach. And so business first, but obviously a lot of time with the finance team, understanding our processes, really getting an understanding of things that are working. And then, hey, look, what are things that if we could change it, we would. And so that was all internal focused. And then I've also spent time, external. I'm about, I'd say probably 45 days in. And, I mentioned to you, getting to know our bankers. We use, JP Morgan is our banker here at Fullstory, was my banker at Salesloft, our auditors, law firms. You're kind of that team that you put around you. I view the CFO as the quarterback that should be, interacting with all of those folks and really taking that burden off of the CEO. And so I've spent time with both, internal and national stakeholders for sure.
What do you think? You've done this now, entered the CFO role 4 times, as we've explained. So you also know where not to spend your time, or the myths of the first 100 days. Again, I know there have been books on this, and I'm certain at some point in time you probably picked one up. But not all of it's applicable, clearly. Companies are different. But what mistakes to avoid the first 100 days?
Yeah, it's a great question. The advice I give every new executive, not just finance leaders, is spend your first of all, the first part is avoid making recommendations before you spend 30 days listening and learning. And, I use these words, assume positive intent. I think the best finance leaders are by default, have this like insatiable amount of intellectual curiosity. So you just keep asking questions, but it's not because you're trying to find something wrong. It's because you want to learn. I think that's kind of number one, is like, don't make the mistake of not listening. But then based on that, I think it's important to pick 3 or 4 really big things. That could be everything from your driver-based long-term financial model to, redoing your board process, whatever that might be. You'll pick those things. Maybe it's launching a new product and pick those things and prioritize them. Because what happens when you come into a company is people just say, oh, you got to fix these 10 things aren't working. This process is broken. This is broken. And by the way, they're all important. But if you don't pick 3 or 4 really big things to get done, it starts to feel like quicksand because you can't get anything done. And so you almost, I think of it like a virtual stack on the desk. Hey, that's important. I'll put it at the bottom of the stack. I'll get to it eventually. And then you got to be ruthless about prioritizing and getting through the big things first. And then you get to the next level of the stack. And I think that's where executives make mistakes, is that they try to tackle everything at the same time. They don't get any momentum. Their team doesn't feel the momentum, and the business doesn't feel the momentum. And I think as a leader, that's important, because momentum, it's a very infectious thing. If you start to get it, it builds on itself, and you'll even get things done faster.
As someone who came up through the FP&A ranks, and I love the Home Depot chapter of your career journey, the early chapter there. It's such an interesting type of business we don't often get to hear about. Want to understand better how you organize your FP&A team, and whether you've, changed over time. Again, with 4 chapters, you probably have a mindset as to what the right size of that team should be. What's the mindset of that team, what it should be.
I think about FP&A, and I think you have to be able to, like any team, no matter how you structure it, you got to be able to answer 3 questions. What happened? Why did it happen? So now what? And you have to answer them in order. And you basically build your foundation from there. If you can't answer what happened, don't go to step B, because it doesn't matter. If you can't tell why, you certainly can't inform the business on what we should do next. And so at its core, I think about having the infrastructure. So you got to have you got to have good data, and you got to have capabilities to access the data. At Fullstory, not only do I own our finance organization, but I own our enterprise systems and data team, think corporate IT. And they've done an awesome job. They've built out a data lake, and we have mountains of data we can analyze, and they've built it in a way where you can actually access it. And so that's number one, is build the infrastructure, build the system. And so what I think about is building your FP&A team where you kind of have a corporate part of it. Could be 1 person, could be 2. It just depends on the size of the company. And that corporate team is responsible for kind of orchestrating a process. They're running your forecasting process. They're running your planning system. They're owning the big model that brings everything in. And then beyond that, you are building what I call partners to work with the business. And they might, depending upon the size of the company, they might support a lot of different functions. They might support, if it's really big, they might support a few. And I view that business partnership as the most rewarding, but the last piece. So you gotta put the infrastructure in place to answer those questions so that you can be a good business partner. At Fullstory, we have a really strong corporate FP&A team, and they do a little bit of both, because look, our FP&A organization at Fullstory is 5 people. It's the same size I would have put in place. It's the size I had at the end of my tenure at Salesloft. So I know it, from my experience, it feels about right. And the corporate team supports the corporate pieces I mentioned, and they support our R&D organization. It's kind of a dual role. But one of the heaviest lifts at a company like ours is go to market. Everything from sales through customer success and services. And so, we have dedicated resources that really spend their days supporting our revenue team. Because as you're growing a company, the biggest investments, the 2 biggest areas you're making investments as a software company are sellers and quota capacity and R&D. And so you got to have finance people that are helping to steer those decisions. And so, I've learned over time that I've had to dedicate, the more people or brain power I can dedicate to those functions, the more apt I can help the business to make even better decisions than they would have without it. And so, Yeah, I think we have it. I think we have it pretty right now. And I think the biggest thing you asked, the last question you asked about is, are there new things I look for? I think the biggest thing I'm pushing on now is like, one is you got to be okay playing with some of the AI tools. Again, not because I want to replace people, because I want to make them more productive. And so I think people that have a systems mindset, people that are willing to say, hey, this is super manual, I want to automate this so I can spend time on other stuff. Those are the type of people I want on my team, because if you're willing to have a systems mindset, that frees you up to do the fun business partnering stuff.
Have you taken any steps to help the team get enlightened together? I'm sure it's part of the conversation regularly, but at the same time, have you, whether it was an offsite or whether it was you realized that a meeting was becoming very focused on some of the AI tools and possibilities, and you said, well, why don't we just discuss this?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually have it's actually not even just finance, but an enterprise-wide initiative called Embrace AI at Fullstory. And so I've dedicated resources from my IT organization. Our people ops team has dedicated resources. So we're building out training programs. I think of it like what's AI 101? Hey, if you just logged into your computer and you wanted to use AI for the first time, what would you do? What are some it all comes back to the use cases. And so that's kind of the 101. And I think we're building that base layer of understanding for everybody in the company. And then when I go to what I call 201, that's okay, now what's some use cases specific to your function? And those can be things that you build yourself, or by the way, we might be able to, I'm really lucky. I inherited a really strong IT organization that likes playing and building in this world of AI. They've learned how to build some agents that we can use to solve tasks. An example, which is really cool, our controller and our head of revenue accounting were like, hey, we're selling into the enterprise world. These deals are getting complicated. It would be really great if we could, have a fast way to analyze a contract and understand how that compares to revenue recognition rules, which, by the way, revenue recognition rules are like 400, hundreds of pages long. So our IT team worked with them and built an agent trained on all of the rev rec rules, so they can just upload the contract and it'll give you an answer. Now, look, there's human interaction. They're reading it for sensibilities, but think about the speed of that. You and I, 10 years ago would have had to go pick up the 400-page document and read it. And so I think that, providing that base level of understanding and then sharing those use cases are part of like this momentum you build, and people understanding, wow, I could use that for contract validation, or I could use that for case deflection. If I'm in IT and I'm getting questions about how to reset my password, we don't need a human being doing that. Like, you can use tools to do that. And so I think we're really layering on AI like that. And in the future, and where it gets really complicated, I view that as 301 or beyond, is now take this concept of an agent and apply them across multiple systems and multiple processes. We're not quite there yet, but I think what I love is our team is starting to embrace and think about those things because of the exposure that they're getting.
Is AI impacting your forecasting yet, or it's to come still?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I always said, and Jack, you probably know this better than me just from all the CFOs you meet with, but I think finance is probably one of the, when it comes to FP&A processes, is probably one of the slower adopters in terms of AI, because there's so much sensitivity to how you forecast. We just went through a process to select a new planning and forecasting tool. And one of the criteria was that there was AI capabilities within it. And so the way I think about it is, and it's all about how we implement it. If we implement it the right way, at a minimum, AI can be like a sounding board, or give you an alternative view. Like, hey, we're going to forecast this. What is the tool saying it might look like? I've seen it work better in revenue forecasting specifically. So you think about companies trying to forecast software bookings and even retention. I think AI is getting smarter at learning your business and giving you not a perfect forecast, but at least like an alternative view to a manual sales call. I still think we've got some work to do to train it on how to forecast, a complicated software business, but I want to get there. And I think, we're certainly going to set it as a goal and see how far we can get.
Can you give us a sense of perhaps the conversation, finance, you're having with department heads who want to make new hires and at the same time have asked for, 3 dozen licenses for an LLM? I mean, is the conversation, at least we've been hearing from finance leaders, it's like, well, let's hold up on those, half dozen new hires. Let's see how you do with these LLMs and discover ways to leverage them more effectively. Is that part of the conversation, or it doesn't reflect that?
No, 100%. I think, I'm a big fan of finance people that say yes and or no but. And what I mean by that is it's not, some decisions are, but generally you're trying to enable the business. And so, yes, maybe we need to hire these people. And how are you applying AI in your customer support organization, as an example? How are you applying AI, in your forecasting process? And so I think we are using that as a tool to get people to adopt. And I would say our business has done it. Back to the embrace AI comment, at Fullstory, for sure, our business leaders are doing a good job, being thoughtful about automation. And, if you're going to grow the business 5 or 10 times over, and you're going to grow your headcount at a much slower rate than that, if you're not thinking process and AI first, you won't be able to do it. And so my answer around hiring people is always, we can do that. We can bring on more people, but that actually is not solving the problem that we're trying to solve. And so how are you thinking about that? And AI is inherently injected into that conversation for sure.
And, that's a role, just as you just characterized it, finance has always played that role. Like, we can throw bodies at something, but is that really is that going to solve the problem? Just as you just said. I'm wondering though, is this conversation that, we see finance playing a very important role here as it looks to sort of be a catalyst to leveraging AI. Do you look at it that way, or am I overstating that?
I totally. I think, obviously every company is set up a little bit differently. And I would even argue, especially a lot of bigger companies, finance and corporate IT are together in concert. I'm lucky at Fullstory, we very much have that function together, and they're very orchestrated together. And so that collective team, our central corporate IT team and my finance team together, are really, and with really good support from our HR organization. Because I think that's important, Jack. I think if you're not going to have help in building out the training, if you're not going to be willing to maybe upgrade your job descriptions to incorporate AI requirements and things like that, it's hard to get adoption. And so I think we've done a good job of kind of building that ecosystem around it. But yeah, sure, we're at the heart of pushing it, because finance in general, I use these words, and I mean this in a positive way, but our job sometimes is to be what I would call constructively abrasive. And what I mean by that is, the abrasive part is, hey, stop in your tracks for a second. Like, what could be another way we could think about this? And I think we just give people an opportunity to pause sometimes and say, no one's saying no, but like, let's just think through this and think through the not just the impact today, but how are we going to think about this 6 months from now and even 12 months from now? And so let's just think about that. And we still may come to the same decision, but let's make sure we have as much information as we possibly can. You can't have all the facts in front of you. But I think that's really important as a finance leader, is to have those discussions along the way. And the only thing I would say, Jack, with AI is you also have to be really flexible, because it's not like a 12-month roadmap. I mean, things are changing certainly quarterly, if not monthly, with the tools. And so you've just got to be nimble and say, wait a minute, I need to change how I think about that, because this business problem I thought I couldn't solve with AI, now I can.
We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And of course, we're hoping you'll go back and identify just one one chapter from your career where you had a moment of insight, strategic insight because of your lines of sight, or it could be a transaction, it could be a risk that you avoided. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, Jack, it's really interesting. That moment happened about 6 months after the first time you and I met. Go back to the fall of 2021. Salesloft was having a record year. We had raised our Series E and been valued at $1 billion right at the end of COVID, and the business was doing great. And so I was in conversations with investors, crossover investors, my team and I, to think about raising like a really big round at a much bigger valuation towards the path to eventual IPO. At the same time, I was having conversations with my peers, with just folks I knew in the macro community and saying, gosh, it doesn't feel like this market can run like this forever. I mean, 2021 was like the peak of, how software was doing. And I think that, I said, hey, team, look, and by team, I mean our CEO and our management team, but also our board, to say, I think we need to explore what I call like a dual path. And what I mean by that is we'll still meet with these investors and look at raising money, but like, let's just see what other opportunities are out there. And through that second piece of the puzzle, that what other opportunities are out there, that led us to eventually be engaged with folks that we had gotten to know at Vista Equity partners who were starting to invest in our space. The more we got to know them, the more we loved their vision for where we were going. And we started to say, look, a transaction with somebody like Vista still allows us to be a standalone business, but it allows us to give liquidity to our investors. It allows us to give liquidity to our employees. And that starts to be pretty meaningful. And why I think of that as a finance strategic moment is it kind of was the culmination of like the lessons I'd learned. I think, the first one about finance making the news, not reporting it. Finance's job is to look around corners. I think we really did say and push pretty hard to say, look, I'm not sure that this momentum and capital raising and is going to continue. And so really pushing to say, hey, we should explore alternative transactions. I think that's number one. Number two is the concept of lines, not dots. You establish relationships throughout your career, not when you need something, but because people want to know you and trust you as a person, so that when you are in the middle of a transaction or something, there's a level of comfort that exists. So I had our bankers that we worked with on the Salesloft transaction, I had known for 3 years, and we'd spent time together, and they'd invested in their relationship with me, even though we weren't paying them any money or doing anything. We had gotten to know the Vista team as people long, before we were ever thinking about a potential sale. So I think that, that was important. And then the third one, which I think speaks a lot to finances, details matter. And when I look back at the end of the Vista transaction, and I got the bill from the data room because they bill you by the page. The bill listed 70,000 pages of documents. And you realize that all the time that you spend, building an incredible close process and having really tight financials and having good reconciliations and tight controls around your commercial processes and your legal processes, all of that shows up in a diligence process. And so I tell people all the time, when someone's like, oh, I don't know, we don't know where our contract, someone will make a comment, not a Fullstory, but you'll hear a CFO say, oh, I got to figure out where all my contracts are. I say, go do that right now. Not because you need it tomorrow, but because by investing in it today, it will make your life so much easier in the future. And, we had gone through, I was thinking about this during the Vista transaction. I think we'd gone through 40 month-end closes. We had I was lucky, incredible accounting team, super rigorous month-end close. So when EY, who was the running diligence for Vista, came in with 30 pages of questions, I was very comfortable that we were going to be able to answer all of them because we had spent all that time, all the repetition, all the practice over and over and over again, and making incremental improvement every month, every quarter. All of that prepared us to go through the transaction. And I was honestly never worried about being able to get through that. And so, for me, I think for my team in finance, we got to be at the center of that transaction and really, help to bring it across the finish line. And it was the most rewarding experience of my career so far.
You guided Salesloft through this transaction. What capital markets playbook are you bringing to Fullstory? And how might the timing differ here?
Yeah, look, I think I've always been a big proponent of you have to run a company that could be public. So you don't have to do everything. I don't mean you have to go and file with the SEC or build processes that aren't necessary, but you got to have really tight financial processes. And when I use the word financial, I'm including things like your customer contracts, kind of everything around that has to be really buttoned up. And so I think, again, Fullstory had done a good job, and we're bringing more to that as part of me joining. I think you got to have really tight operational rigor, and that's across the company. Your revenue team has to be able to forecast. Your customer success team has to be able to understand retention and churn. And I think, pushing the business to really invest in those processes, we're doing that here at Fullstory. And then I think the other thing which gets people that's part of any type of quote unquote transaction, and that could be being a public company or being a private acquisition, whatever that might look like, is you got to have a really, really crisp product strategy. And you got to have a way to tie that product strategy back to the long-term performance of the business. And I think that we're really bringing that. We have a really strong chief product and technology officer. Claire is her name. She was one of the reasons I joined here. And she's a great partner in thinking through that. We talk in terms of outcomes. And you think about 3 big outcomes for Fullstory. And again, I don't view eventual liquidity event as an outcome. Outcomes meaning we're going to grow and accelerate our enterprise business. That's a business for us that's now 65% of our ARR versus, 3 years ago, it was like 40%. So growing up market, and you and I know bigger customers mean bigger contracts, stickier revenue. So that's number one. Number two is we're investing in building new products. You heard me mention our workforce product. And then, now we just released our, what we call Story AI. So not only now can you capture all the data, but now we're giving you a sidekick right next to you to give you insights and opportunities from that data. And then the third one, which I would say of the 3 is the least tied to commercial outcomes today, but I think is important, is, back to my comment about Fullstory and the data we capture, we should be at the center of the AI conversation, whatever that looks like over the next 12 to 24 months. And so we're deliberately making product investments that way. And many of those are showing up in the financials. And so I would say that last one, especially around product strategy, is one that, we did it at Salesloft pretty well, but one I've been really focused on because I think that has the ability to really maximize any outcome for a company. I think, Jack, if we do all those things together, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I came to Fullstory because I was confident it would have an outcome. Part of that is my responsibility to get it there, but right now it's about running a great company, and the outcome will happen eventually.
Before we go, I just wanted to have you circle back to the Atlanta, circle back close to home, and ask you anything from the personal side you care to share with us, something maybe your new colleagues might not know about you, some interest that you have, something you've pursued in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've shared this. I grew up playing basketball all the way into high school. So played for a few years in high school, and eventually kind of realized that wasn't going to be a career path for me. I think when I was in 5th grade, maybe I thought I could be an NBA basketball player. But, I love the game of basketball. I still love watching it, still watch all the NBA games, the playoffs right now. My Florida Gators, I went to the University of Florida. We won the national championship in basketball this year, which was awesome. But what the reason I bring up basketball is I think it really taught me two big lessons, which I think are a part of how I think today. One is I was a point guard in basketball. And why I love the point guard position is you're the orchestrator. Look, you're not going to score the most points. You're not going to grab the most rebounds, most likely. But your job is to make sure that everybody is in the right positions to maximize their role. And I view a CFO role as very similar to that. And so I think those lessons really came to me. And then I think the other one, which a basketball team taught me, and I've now been very lucky at Salesloft and at G2 and now at Fullstory, basketball taught me the importance of team. And I'm a big fan of this concept of team one. And that's the executive team. And so when I sit at the table with our executive team, I'm not the finance guy. I am a member of team one. I represent the finance function in terms of bringing that knowledge and domain skill set, but we make decisions as a team. And so I think a basketball team operates that way too. And I think the best exec teams operate that way. And so, I guess that's probably not one I bring up with the team very often, but.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. We're up to our final question, and it's the same one I asked you last time, but you were a world apart from where you are now. Looking forward, we'd like to know what your priorities are as a CFO for the coming 12 months. What would those be?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One is really being a great partner to our executive team as we continue to scale and focus on those outcomes, driving enterprise revenue growth, which finance has a big role to play, helping our product team to really launch new products that are meaningful and drive meaningful results. And then continuing to think about how we're positioning ourselves in this world of AI to help, drive that ecosystem. I think that, that's a big part of my role operationally, internally. And then I would say the other one, because I am brand new to Fullstory, is, because you mentioned this is my fourth time doing this, I am lucky in that I've got a network of investors and I'd say external stakeholders which want to learn more about Fullstory. And so part of my responsibility is, really being that voice in the market, in addition to our incredible leaders, to help educate on what we do, where are we going, what's our path forward. And I think if we marry those two things up, again, I think it's going to drive a great outcome for Fullstory one day. But over the next 12 months, those are two really big areas that I'm going to be focused on.
Chad Gold, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack. Love being here.